Welcome back, everyone, to Merge Conflict, your weekly developer podcast. And I am recording for maybe not the first time, but for the first time on my MacBook Air with my good microphone. And if you're watching on YouTube, with a terrible webcam. And it happens to be the webcam built into my MacBook Air. Frank, why do they even put it on here? Why is it even here? It's garbage.
Oh, okay. Well, those are very different topics. They put it on there because what's a computer without a webcam these days? Like that's silliness, absolute silliness. Why is it so bad? Great question, James. Why is it so bad? Like the iPhone 6, whatever beautiful camera the iPhone 6 had, put that in there, and can we all please have gorgeous FaceTime? Or / why doesn't it do AI post-processing? But maybe we're moving into that world. I got my AI in. No matter what, I got my AI in.
Well, and this one doesn't even it doesn't even have the rocket back and forth mode. You know what I mean? You need the newer, the tracker.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that actually brings us to tonight's topic, because you might be wondering, James, why are you on your MacBook Air? You have a fancy, awesome Windows machine. You have a fancy Canon camera. You got an awesome, microphone, and you just turn it on, plug it on, boom, it's good to go. Well, it's very hot in the Pacific Northwest, and I didn't want to turn on my big computer, so I've been just rocking the Project Faltero, waiting for my Snapdragon dev device ever to come, just because surprisingly, I have two huge Elgato key lights that Frank made me turn on, which did improve the video quality a bajillion %. And I will prove it to you because I'll turn them off if you're on. Oh, now just one turned off. Oh,
yeah. Pro tip out there: if you have a camera that looks terrible, chances are you're just underlit, and you just have to light yourself until it's uncomfortable. The moment it's uncomfortable, that's probably almost enough lighting. You have to go one notch higher. It has to be slightly painful, the amount of light that's hitting you.
It's true. We'll see if my key lights ever turn both off. We'll talk. One went off. It's just like sometimes this. Oh, there it goes. Okay, here we go. Well, there we go. Not great. Better. That's even like really low percentage.
You're giving me a seizure. Let's stop.
Okay. Anyways, here's tonight's topic: is hot takes on brand new developer machine setups. And I keep looking up and to the right because that's where my camera's normally at, by the way, and I need to look forward where the little thing is. So Frank, I have reformatted my MacBook. This is a brand new, fresh. Remember a few weeks ago when I was trying to recover all of my hard drive? Remember that?
Yeah, that's impossible, by the way, I've learned. So you just answered every question I was going to have. I had all sorts of questions about why you would do this, and you just answered them all right there. Yeah, because Apple's getting better about deleting random system files, and at the same time that systems file folder just keeps getting bigger and bigger. So
Indeed.
What's one to do at some point? It's still the 90s. It's still I hate it. I actually don't do it very often, but maybe once every 5 years or 10 years I'll wipe a machine.
I was going through the wiping process. I installed that app that you had told me to do, and I started deleting just everything under the sun. And, I haven't had this MacBook Air for too many years, but after about 3 days of installing anything developer related, your machine's basically destroyed, right? Which is why I actually really love GitHub code spaces. I love Microsoft dev boxes, like, virtual machines, these instant spin up devices, throw them away, you get everything clean. But I like to have things local as well on my machine, right? It's just kind of nice to have. And I started realizing that I've had many of the years and decades of previous Xamarin and Visual Studio and to .NET MAUI and all these .NET things as well.
They add up.
They add up. There's hidden installer packages. There's this and there's that. And there's all over and it's hard to get rid of stuff. And not just that. I'm talking like Java bits and Xcode bits. Mm-hmm. I found the Xcode simulator folders, and there was like 60 gigs of old ones from like the first Xcodes. Like they just don't uninstall them gracefully, apparently.
Yeah, again, newer versions of Mac are a little bit better. You can go to settings, storage, details. There's like a developer tools details, but it still doesn't delete everything. That's what I learned. There's still files in random places, and if you Google around, you can learn what all the hidden places are. Otherwise, use the magic tool I mentioned, James. It's called Grand Perspective. There's other tools out there like it, but it just visualizes all your hard drive space so that you can go find stuff to delete, because that's all you want to do is go find the big stuff and to go delete it.
And I did, and it was fun, I will say. But I've done this several times. Like I've had a few different, obviously, work machines. I've had some personal machines and new laptops. And nowadays, right, between if you put everything either on iCloud or Google Drive or OneDrive or Dropbox or whatever it is, wherever you store your life, honestly, because they have the virtual stuff, right? It really sort of
Yeah.
solves a lot of problems, which is going from machine to machine and having to re-upload and download all the things. So when you set this machine up, I go, oh, install OneDrive, boom, I have everything back if I need it, my full
Right.
terabyte of junk if I need it. But
Yeah.
that doesn't get to the, those are files, but it doesn't get to the bits and pieces to get my machine in developer mode. Now, I've not done anything on this machine because I was
Mm.
planning this not only to do a clean wipe, but also to record a video on how to
Oh,
properly
cool.
set up for .NET MAUI development with VS Code on a Mac or Linux or Windows.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to be tainted by previous installs, and I wanted to go through like, here's a new machine ish that I had. So I want to do some hot takes, and I want to start first and foremost with Xcode. And I
Yeah.
want to get your take on installing Xcode, where, how, management,
Right.
what's the Frank Krueger recommended approach here when it comes to Xcode?
Well, here's a small problem because there's the Frank Krueger recommended approach, and then there's what does Frank Krueger do?
Okay.
And
Yeah.
I'm sad, very sad to report that they are two different things. What Frank Krueger recommends is that you go get this app called Xcodes, and it is a wonderful way to manage all your installed Xcodes because ideally you only ever have one Xcode installed.
Yeah.
But we are in the middle of a beta summer. I've got two Xcodes. We all got two Xcodes. So you just can't help it. And so I do recommend that. Mostly because I really tried to use the App Store version of Xcode. I am a believer in Apple's app technology. I make my living off of their app deployment technology. I'm like, it's just an IDE. How hard is it to transport an IDE over an app store? And it does work. It works 90% of the time. But the other percent of the time, it just shows a spinner and drives you absolutely insane. So I do not recommend the App Store version of Xcode. I do recommend Xcodes. It's a little, if it's your first time with Xcode, I'm very sorry. It's a little bit complicated. I get it. Maybe the App Store version is for you for the first time, but learn to use that app. I personally don't use Xcodes because it just doesn't work on my machine. Whatever destructive action I took on this
Weird.
machine at some point in time, Xcode hates my machine.
Huh.
And I've just never been able to get it to work. It just errors out constantly. So what Frank Krueger actually does is goes to the developer downloads page and clicks the button and downloads the Xcode and puts it in the right place. It's pathetic, but it also works reliably because I can do that.
It's really, so this is fascinating too, because I have a similar, this has been and this is why I wanted to have this conversation, because I've had a similar recommended route. And I also just talked to David Ordnow on the Maui team. We just did a new Maui podcast, and we talked about this. We talked about this specifically, and he had a different approach, well, similar approach. He said, never install the App Store version ever. And he's like, only install from the developer portal or get Xcode. So it was like a different order of operation.
Mm-hmm.
Now,
but we agreed, sadly. Sorry,
yes.
Apple. We all, it does work 90% of the time. It's that 10% that you just go insane waiting for it to install an Xcode.
So what I have recommended people is, I've recommended not too recently, in the last year or two, on my YouTube, I have a whole video on Xcode. So if you do want to put one in the show notes, it goes over Xcodes in general. I've recommended Xcodes to do that.
Okay.
That being said, I've only ever installed it from the App Store. I'm an App Store, but I'm just
We're all liars. We all just lie to people. This is terrible. The truth is coming out, everyone. Okay.
It's like,
because it works. It works 90%, especially if you have a good internet connection. And you live near California. You're in good shape.
And you'll wait forever. It'll just be like ridiculous. You'll be like, why am I waiting here? It's just spinning and not doing anything. And then additionally, as long as you have turned off automatic updates. Don't
Oh
automatic
yeah.
update. Don't do that
No, no,
ever.
no need.
No need. No need to do that. It's just bad. No, whoever auto updates a developer tool. And that's the one problem with the App Store is like I have auto updates off on everything. I don't want anything to auto update. Don't do that. I'll tell you when to install updates. And I'm selective on Mac, obviously for Xcode. Now, obviously, the nice thing is if you install from the App Store, you can still install other versions, but I still think things get a little funky. I think there's like some funk happening. You know what I mean? When that happens, in my opinion.
Well, when you start installing many Xcodes, you run into the simulator issue because, as you mentioned, it's not good about deleting simulators. So you just start accumulating simulators. So you quickly you get into a lot of device management, that kind of garbage. Because unlike Android, that makes creating emulators near impossible, iOS, on the other hand, is just like, here's 1,000 simulators. You're like, great, thanks, Apple. I did want to test on 800 variations of the iPhone. So I think that can be a little bit complex, but otherwise, I think all the Xcodes work pretty well side by side. One other benefit to it is I build a lot of my apps with GitHub Actions, and in those actions, I'm selecting very specific versions of Xcode. I didn't used to do this. I used to just say, give me the most recent. But then GitHub's definition of recent got very complex and weird. Yeah. And so I've just gone back to good old version numbers. So I lock in my GitHub Actions to a specific Xcode version. And so I just have my dev machine on that same Xcode version. After a beta summer like this, I'll bump up all those versions. But I don't know. Usually you don't have to chase the SDKs. You wait for a good SDK to come out, and you just kind of stick with it.
Yeah, I like that. Okay, so that kind of solves my Xcode with Xcodes. I got the two there. I think I'll walk through those three scenarios and tell people different things. Obviously, like when you would want to use either. If you are going through the developer portal, you basically just want to use Xcodes. There are some people that are fearful of Xcodes because you have to enter your Apple credentials because you need to log in. Like that's the only way to get it. But
yeah, okay, that makes sense, right? Because these are developer downloads. Okay,
yeah. So there is that, but it's open source. I trust it. Just because it's open source doesn't mean you trust it, but I do trust it because it's pretty tried and true and developer first, audited. I think it's pretty safe, but I'm not a lawyer. So obviously, if your company XYZ wants that, but you can always go to the developer portal, download it manually, and you're good to go. Is there anything else for iOS development that needs to be like installed, recommended, pure in there? Now we're obviously going to get to the .NET and the visual
the
stuff
IDEs
later, but
and all that stuff. I think we're pretty lucky in the Mac world that Xcode is a pretty full-featured thing.
Yeah.
Because it comes with the performance tool. I swear by all the performance tools, so you want to make sure you have all those, but they come with it. Nowadays, they are trimming down Xcode, so the first time you run it, it's going to ask you what kind of stuff do you want to develop for. So you got to make some decisions. Do you want to do tvOS? Optional. Do you want to do Vision OS? Optional. Do you want to do iOS? Optional. So it's going to come up with all those selections. So I think it's a little bit different now that they do make you make a few decisions, but you can always change your mind. It's easy enough to install the additional SDKs. As far as configuring like your environment, I have 100 recommendations on what to do to this little Macintosh. You should be installing Homebrew. I think you should switch your default shell to Fish. I think it's a superior shell. I have lots of recommendations along those grounds, but for specific development, I think, just getting Xcode up and running, you are in such good shape.
Okay. iOS, check. If you are further along in your process of shipping applications, if you're not doing CI/CD, which would be the recommended approach, you can also use Transporter, which is another standalone application to actually upload your packages to Apple. That's standalone. Also, if you want to test your application, you can install TestFlight, which is a standalone application as well. So things that developers may want to think about later on, not core to the process, but some additional apps that you may want from Apple that are like in the tool chain, I guess.
Thank you for reminding me. TestFlight has been a game changer for me.
It's good.
Because I'll often use the internal testing mode of it because you don't have to get approval or anything. And I'll just have the CI/CD do a build, and then I'll test on the actual build, which is so nice because as developers, we love to fool ourselves into thinking that the app is going to work just fine. So
Yeah,
it's good to test actual production builds early and often.
I agree. All right, so I'm not doing just iOS development. I'm not just Mac
Mm-hmm.
development. So we
Mm-hmm.
know we're doing cross-platform development on other operating
Android.
systems. Android. I'm a little torn here. So for all of my
Okay.
life, I've been
Uh-huh.
spoiled, Frank, spoiled. The amazing engineering team over at Microsoft and Xamarin before it have done such a good job of trying to hide anything and everything Android. I'm talking they've hidden the SDK management.
Yeah.
They've had it handled. They've hidden the
Where is
virtual
it?
device management. They've
It's just
hidden
out there.
JDK installs. They've hidden everything. It's all
Yeah.
Android SDKs. It's all hidden
Yeah.
from you. Just now,
Yeah.
now it's so good in Visual Studio on Windows that if you open a project and you don't have a thing, it's just like, cool, I'm just going to get this for you. And it just does it. It's like so good.
Yeah. I was introducing my friend to Maui probably a few months ago, and I got nervous because he opened Visual Studio. I'm like, "Have you installed any of this stuff?" He said, "Nope." And I'm like, "Oh God, this is going to be horrendous." But by golly, click those next buttons, few progress bars, a lot of progress bars, and the app started building. Amazing. I did get nervous. We've been using these tools for a long time. They weren't always that smooth.
They weren't always that smooth, and things are a little bit different now in the world of, Visual Studio Code, right? That's not going to do all of the bits and pieces for you. So there are a few ways of getting Android bits and pieces up and running. Like I was talking to David on the podcast as well, and there's two mechanisms. Mechanism in the documentation says go install the Microsoft OpenJDK 17,
Right.
just go do that. And
Yeah.
then install the Android SDK in they don't even talk about emulators yet, but maybe later on they do. In one of four ways, which I guess I only have two on Mac, but one is to create a new .NET MAUI project and then use the install Android dependencies target. And what you do is you do a build with a -T of install Android dependencies. You build it on Android, pass in a bunch of flags, you pass in an Android SDK path, a Java SDK delivery, and that you accept
Insane.
Android SDK licenses, and it does it for you. I'm assuming that's what Windows is doing over there,
Yeah,
just magically, by the way.
exactly. In the
That
background.
sounds scary. I don't know. I could do it. It says recommended, though, Frank.
I do remember reading that now. I'd forgotten it. I put it behind me because all I remember thinking was clever, not doing that.
The
But making dependencies. It makes sense that dependencies are a part of the build script. That
Yeah.
totally makes sense. But at the same time, it's so foreign to use
Yeah.
MS Build to install a bunch of
Stuff.
SDK stuff.
I think if Visual Studio Code had the option to kind of do it, maybe it does. I need to get in
It
there. I need
does.
to do.
It
Does it
does.
have it?
Yeah. I obviously like the extension market on there is insane, but there's a lot of Android tools and stuff like that. When I did this last, I found that installing that OpenJDK to be kind of the weirdest part. But
Mm.
once I had that installed, everything else just kind of started working and falling in line and that kind of stuff. I
Okay.
still don't fully understand the Microsoft Oracle anger issues and feuds. So whatever, install OpenJDK.
It's open. Now,
It's
there
open.
are three other processes. One would be Visual Studio, which I talked about already, which already does everything, which is funny because this is like, hey, this sounds like, hey, if you want to use Visual Studio Code, just install Visual Studio, which is what I do on my Windows machine, by the way. And I let Visual Studio 2022 handle everything. So when I just open Visual Studio Code, it just works out of the box. But I'm on a Mac, which means the other option, which is install it via a package manager on Linux, is not an option because I'm not on Linux, which means there's one more option, which is the one I'm leaning towards, which is to install Android Studio. I got Xcode.
Oh,
Do I just got to install Android Studio as well? It's got a package manager. It's got debugging tools. It's got, AVD managers. How are we feeling about this?
no, I don't like it.
Well,
Okay. I've done this in the past. Full. This is, again, I'm lying. Okay. No, but I don't do it anymore. I used to install because, yeah, it was the quickest way to get this kind of stuff up. James, I hate to say it, but I use Rider, and Rider has a lot of Android SDK management stuff built into it. and I don't mean to say I hate to say I use Rider. I was just trying to keep it with open source tools because you have to pay for Rider. So I'm cheating a little bit. I'm paying for a tool to make my life easier. Um, yeah, Android Studio is free and it's made by the same people. So
Yeah.
you might as well just go get the free one that does
Yeah.
it. Um, yeah, okay. Actually, I'm glad I said all that aloud, everyone. I'm just rewinding back to what I said. I guess that probably is the easiest way to go since that's what I do. I
Yeah.
rely on an advanced IDE to manage this stuff. I always have. When Visual Studio for Mac was a thing, I always relied on Visual Studio for Mac to do this stuff. So yeah, rely on an IDE to manage it because otherwise it's terrible.
Yeah. There is, like there is a great, guide on the documentation on how to use and set up emulators and do stuff on Mac and on other stuff, or I just plug in a device. I guess it would work as well. I think it's just like SDK managers, what it's doing, a bunch of stuff. I think on iOS we're a little spoiled because you have to install, you have to you can't not install it, right? So
Well,
there's this paved path for iOS and Mac development, which is like if you want to do it, you have to have this. But on Android, it's like the Wild West. You know what I mean? Like on Windows, like you got to have Visual Studio, and it's
yeah,
like paved path. But it's like Android's like this. You just get it from one of 18 places. You decide. You know what I mean?
open
Do
source, baby. Put
do
in
what you
whatever
want to
directory you
do.
want, just
Yeah,
set these 10,000 environment variables so that we know where things are and
yeah,
all will be good. And yeah, you can use any SDK JDK you want. We recommend you use this very specific one, but yeah, you can totally use whichever one you want, but please use this very specific one.
exactly. Yeah,
Oh, Android, you're wonderful. And I think once you do get the SDKs all set up, creating the emulators has gotten a little bit better, but I've noticed a lot of the default templates are still terrible. So if you're going to do Android development, do yourself a favor and make sure you have an Android device. It's so
yeah.
much easier to do development on the device.
Yeah, I recently got a lot of questions around, and I haven't experienced recently. And I think I am going to install Android Studio because I haven't experienced the setup process for Android devices on ARM machines on Mac.
Mm-hmm.
Previously, Google they did release one for Mac, and for the trial or preview, they had it like as a download MDG or whatever from GitHub that you could download, and then that's what I just had on my machine, and I docked it. But
Yeah.
then they put it into their Android device manager. I don't think it ever showed up in Visual Studio for Mac for some reason, or just maybe it did eventually. And I just didn't do it because I had one. But I know on Windows there's not one for ARM, so I was using WSA, the Windows subsystem for Android, or just plugging in a device. But it is nice just to have an emulator around, obviously.
It is. It is. Yeah.
I'll be interested to see how it, works. So what I'm hoping is like when you install Xcode, everything for iOS and Mac just kind of magically works, right? For like VS Code and Rider and all this other stuff. And I'm hoping the same is true for Android. Like, hey, paved path. Although it doesn't say it's a recommended path, so I need to go talk to it because I just talked to, by the way, David, and David's like, just install Android Studio, which is not the recommended path on the doc. So that's why I'm like, what do I do? But
we're all lying. Oh my God, we're all being discovered. The truth is coming out. We just got to tell the truth. How do we actually do this stuff?
yeah,
We installed a big nasty IDE because it's better and simpler. But it's just, I mean, if you're on a server, fine. But most developers are on a GUI installed IDE. Yeah.
Yeah.
It's sad, but there we are. And at least it is easier in CI/CD because there are usually setup scripts and like built-in actions to get all this junk set up for you. So it's kind of ridiculous that it's easier on the CI/CD stuff. You just do import this little action and get the environment all set up. Whereas on your dev machine, you have to install a whole IDE. It's kind of pathetic, and I get that frustration.
Yeah.
But it's honestly the easier path. Dev containers, I guess, are an option, but getting those to work with emulators and getting all that communication stuff working is going to be a pain.
Yeah.
The networking.
Yeah, and I'm looking at the Flutter as well, and like what it recommends, and it literally does say for Mac development tools, just install Android Studio, and then optionally, if you want to, install VS Code and IntelliJ and other stuff as well. So
Right.
interested.
Is Android Studio the main Flutter environment? Sorry, everyone. I don't know too much about Flutter.
I think it's VS Code. Yeah.
That's the main Flutter environment? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I'm actually looking here.
And
Okay,
I
so
do,
what they
yeah.
say is you can install just VS Code, add the Flutter extension, create a new project. VS Code's going to prompt you to find the SDK. It
Right.
won't be able to find it, so hit download SDK, and then select what folder you want to put the SDK in. That's just a Flutter SDK, though.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Okay, and then it says configure Android toolchain in Android Studio. So that's what it says.
There we go.
So you need to do all that and then do all that stuff over there. I'm pretty sure. Someone correct me if I'm completely wrong over
And
here.
please correct me, but I don't think I'm hallucinating, but I believe there are extensions for VS Code where people are adding at least some Android SDK management. I don't think I'm hallucinating, but I've looked around and grabbed a few.
I would hope so.
But then I've settled on, good old Rider.
You would think so. If I look here, there's so one says Android iOS emulator, and then some emulator launcher. I'm sure there's something in here for it.
And there are a lot of app launchers also for VS Code. I was noticing this because I was getting a little bit frustrated. All my apps aren't 100% MAUI compatible. Therefore, the MAUI extension is sometimes happy with my apps and sometimes not happy with my apps. And it's surprising. There are a lot of interesting third-party launchers for VS Code available too that basically you just point it at your .app file or whatever, and it just does the right thing to get that puppy running.
That makes it. Yeah, you just AVD it up and done. I like it. Yeah, it's been a while. Okay, so I think this is the recommended path. Then I'm going to install VS Code. Then I'm going to install the .NET MAUI. Well, I need to install .NET 8, and then I'll install the MAUI workload, the MAUI extension, and then I think we should be happy campers.
Yeah, I think my preferred method is still, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but I thought the templates were still there if you just install .NET 8. So you can create a MAUI project, and then when you try to build it, that's when it's going to complain about the workloads, and then you can do .NET workload restore, my preferred way to get the workloads, and then you'll make sure to get the most up-to-date workloads, and everything will be happy and compatible.
Okay. I'll give that a try, I think. Yeah. I'm used to the just do it and run it and go. But yeah, that does make sense. I do think the templates, well, I don't know. I thought the templates shipped with the workload, but
yeah, that one has a little bit of a chicken and egg problem there. I have to check on that one.
Yeah.
I thought maybe I just had some old templates installed or something like that, and that's why I'm able to get away with that trick.
That could be too, because you might have an older version, but then actually like you didn't update your workloads. Yeah, and then how do you update? I guess I like how I know nothing. Visual Studio just does it all for me. I don't know how to do anything.
Thank you for making a video. Please explain all this stuff.
Yeah.
So the workloads do update, but I just tend to stick with .NET workload restore with specific .NET SDK version that I'm using. So I lock in my SDK version, my .NET version, and then I just do workload restore. So honestly, I'm not 1,000,000% sure which version of the workloads they're getting, but that's why we do testing, everyone. That's why we test our binaries before we ship, just to double check all that stuff.
I like it. Yeah, I think that's the last like bit and piece that I need to figure out. And then I guess, how are you keeping up to date with the releases of .NET? Like, what's your standard protocol? I think so for like example on Xcode and Android Studio and the Android bits, I basically just look at the docs. I don't update right away. I kind of wait until there's like, oh, this one's compatible with blah, 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 and get that.
Yeah.
But how are you keeping up to date with .NET 8 in this world of installing things manually like an animal?
Yeah, I would say okay. I've finally gotten a bit of discipline in my project, so I use the global JSON file definitely to lock in the SDK to a specific version, no messing around. I've also started using the directory packages versions thing that we talked about on an
Mhm.
episode. So all my packages are pretty much locked into versions also. And so it's pretty easy for me to upgrade. Let's, like my last one was going from 7 to 8. That's pretty easy. Honestly, the annoying thing is I just would have like 12 projects that say net 7. Like you
Yeah.
gotta go through and change all those to net 8. It's a little bit annoying. I almost want to just throw that into the directory props, but I haven't had the guts to. Uh, so I would say overall okay. I do find it honestly a little bit annoying to do it like every year. I definitely stick with the mainstream releases for all my apps. I'll have pre-releases installed on my dev machine for sure just to play around, but um I'm very conservative with version numbers with my apps. If there's an SDK that's working and I don't need a new API
Mm.
from a newer version, I'm not updating that SDK version. It's
Are
working.
are
Leave
so
it.
like so like there's Patch Tuesday. So like today we're recording on July 9th, and
Yeah.
today there was if I go to the dev blog, devblogs.microsoft.com/.net, there's a beautiful new post about C# 13. But then there's
Mm-hmm.
also the .NET and .NET Framework July 2024 servicing releases updates, which has some security vulnerability updates in it. It has updates for .NET 6 and .NET 8. Has
Yeah.
MAUI updates, ASP.NET Core improvements, runtime SDK for 807 that is in here.
Yeah.
So like, are you, yes, .NET 8 is there. These patches, are you installing the patches like monthly or on your machine? Are you doing it every other month? Like, what's your cadence? Like, obviously, me at work, I work at Microsoft. It's like I'm a big dog fooder, right? So like, when I'm doing and work, we have internal builds of Visual Studio. So like I'm literally running like the next version of Visual Studio, right?
Mm-hmm.
Which installs who knows what's on my machine type of deal. But since this is my development machine I own,
Yeah.
I want to follow along. But then I do a little bit worried, like if I install, like when you would update. Okay, so here's an example with Visual Studio on Windows. If I there's Visual Studio updates every month, right? Basically,
Mm-hmm.
if I update and a new version of .NET 8 patch release comes out, it uninstalls the old one, installs a
Mm-hmm.
new one because
Oh,
Visual
jeez.
Studio is managing it, right? Which I think is
Right.
delightful. It's like how
Kind
my
of.
mind works.
Okay.
It's how Xamarin works.
Wow.
It's how Xamarin Studio worked. Don't give me that. That's how it worked.
Okay.
How it worked. You go one. This is what's installed,
Right.
and that's what it did. It is how it worked. Don't give me that squinty face. That is how it worked, Frank.
Can I explain Squinty Face?
Go ahead,
Squinty
squinty face.
Squinty Face's .NET Core / .NET is different.
Yes.
On Mac, it just sticks around forever. You don't really delete them ever. So it's changed. I agree. That is how it
Yeah.
happened on Xamarin. But even with Xamarin for years, I've had ancient copies of .NET sticking around
Yeah,
forever.
yeah. I mean, but Visual Studio for Mac did get better. It would uninstall, point releases and stuff like that at some point,
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is, like, if you go to your .NET directory, do you have like a 20 .NET 8s installed? I think we might have talked about this previously, but now I'm just getting recommendations from Frank Krueger. What do I need to do? But or what are you doing?
No.
Because I'm probably
I,
going to install versions of .NET 8 every
yeah.
single month. I think that's what I'm supposed to do.
No, I don't think you need to. I think those security updates are important if you're running like a server, if you're presenting a large attack surface like that. When you have a server, you have an open port. Anyone can connect to that port and just start attacking you. Anyone in the world from any location in the world. The internet's cool. Apps are different.
SDK versus runtime is what you're saying. Because you're
Yeah.
gonna SDK develop on runtime
Yeah.
deploy. I mean, they're both important because security is important. But
Mm-hmm.
patch Tuesday, hey, be aware. Maybe it's time to patch my server if it's not automatically doing it for me.
Yeah, and obviously, security updates are security updates. Apps can be attacked in different ways and things like that, but the security surface is just completely different. And I don't think, I think a lot of those patches just don't affect apps. A lot of them are in the TCP connection. Like ways to fool that kind of level, that kind of stuff. So I do update, but just not at a super fast cadence or anything like that. Just not needed. I just haven't noticed. I tend to update more like when the iOS SDK requires it, when there's an
Yeah,
API there that I want. Just because, yeah, I just don't fear the attack surface the way I would if I was running a server. That's a
gotcha.
whole different world.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then additionally, one of the nice things about .NET MAUI in 2024 is that we're starting with .NET 8. The Surface releases ship as NuGet. If it just ships as NuGet packages, so
Mm-hmm.
you could have an older version of it installed, but just get it via NuGet packages. There might be
Yeah.
some differences, but like minimal, if anything. So you can just update your NuGet packages just like we used to do in Xamarin Forms days.
Right. And I said that I'm pretty paranoid and I super lock in my global JSON, but the global JSON is wonderfully configurable. So you can tell it to do patch releases if you are concerned about security. In that case, you do start to accumulate versions on your dev machine. I think I got a little bit tired of that. I'll admit. My lax in security is a little bit of laziness because I got tired of a million SDKs. So maybe in CI/CD, maybe I should up my game a little bit and at least do patch upgrades and things like that for the CI/CD builds, even if not on my dev machine.
Nice. Yeah. I like that. I do think that, I don't know. I thought someone was
Well,
creating a .NET.
can I also, sorry, I just want to
Yeah.
also mention GitHub has gotten really good at posting security notices for packages that get flagged. Like every so often, it's sorry, Newtonsoft JSON, but usually there's
Mm.
something in Newtonsoft JSON. They're like, hey, there's a bug, go upgrade your package. And I go do those things. Um, .NET is really mature. They're not introducing that many security bugs these days. So the security bugs are often going to be in third-party libraries and things like that.
Mhm. Gotcha. Okay. Well, it's good recommendations. Install the latest bits, get the bits, figure out when you want to do stuff, check your NuGets, get your Xcodes, get your Android
Yeah.
Studios, get your VS Codes, install all the IDEs, all the code editors, basically, is what I'm hearing.
And completely change out your default shell to fish. It's a beautiful, colorful shell, and you'll be guaranteed that anytime someone posts something to run at the command line, it won't work on your computer because they won't have taken fish into account.
I
And
tried
so,
fish one time. You told me to, and then I was like, yeah, back to Zish.
yeah, Zish. But if you want to live dangerously and colorfully, I recommend installing fish.
Yeah. And if you're on Windows, use the Windows Terminal because it's fantastic. Like the the Terminal app. It's amazing. It's like just amazing. It's so good.
Is
That's
that
how
PowerShell or is that
it's all of them. It has all the shells in
it,
one.
it, okay, so it has the old command shell too.
Oh yeah, it has all of them. It has the Visual Studio
Okay.
shells. It has Power shells. It
I
has
like
WSLs. It's got all the things.
my C colon / greater
Yeah,
than.
it does all the
I
stuff.
need that.
Yeah, it does it all. It's really cool because it's super highly customizable and does the stuff and all this other stuff, which is cool. So I'm not a terminal person, so I'm a little scared of this new world, but we'll see how it goes. But Frank, I appreciate your input, and I think that's going to do it for this week's Merge Conflict. If you do have questions, recommendations on how you set up your Mac machine for .NET development or .NET MAUI development, let us know right into the show. Go to mergeconflict.fm. There's a contact button. You can go ahead and tweet at us. You can go ahead and drop into our Discord. You can go ahead and leave a comment on YouTube. That's the number one place. That's the number one place I check. If you go to youtube.com/@mergeconflict.fm, that's where you'll find us. We'll put a link in the show notes. That's going to do it for this week's Merge Conflict. So until next time, I'm James Montemagno.
And I'm Frank Kruger. Thanks for watching and listening.
Peace.